Rachel Reeves is absolutely devastating what's left of the British economy. And if you don't believe me, watch this video all the way to the end and see if I can't change your mind. I think that the next recession we face here in Britain will absolutely be the worst of our lifetimes. Now in this video, I am going to take you through what the Labour Party promised they would do prior to the election in their manifesto, what they have actually done, and the disastrous consequences of those actions. So let's get into it. So what exactly did the Labour Party promise in their manifesto prior to the election? Well, here we go. Sustained economic growth is the only route to improving the prosperity of our country and the living standards of working people. That is why it is Labour's first mission for government. It means being pro-business and pro-worker. We are the party of wealth creation. Now, all of that sounds very, very good. Pro-business, pro-worker, wealth creation, great buzzwords. But is that the reality? Has that been reflected in the Labour government so far? No, because the first budget, unfortunately, was a very anti-business budget. What did they do? Well, they introduced two measures, I think, that have affected businesses in a very significant way. The first is they increased the employer's contribution to national insurance. So they were trying to raise a bit of extra money, a 1.2% increase on employers' national insurance contributions. And then the last thing they did, and this is the real sort of death hammer blow for a lot of businesses, well, they increased the minimum wage. Now, I know what you're thinking. Increasing the minimum wage sounds like a good thing. And in some respects, it could be. If you increased the minimum wage in this country and then offset it for businesses by reducing corporation tax or something else, that could work really well for ordinary working people. But when you increase the minimum wage and therefore you have additional costs for businesses, and then you also give them other additional costs at the same time, well, a lot of businesses, particularly those operating on very small margins, can no longer afford to be in business here in the UK. They will either close in whole or in part. People will lose jobs. That is not a good consequence. That is not a pro-business wealth creation government. It just isn't. So are we seeing the kinds of things that I described just now? Fewer businesses opening, more businesses closing? Well, yes, we are, unfortunately. According to an article from Bloomberg, company insolvencies are surging in the UK after the Labour government reduced tax breaks and increased levies for owners. Okay, well, that's pretty unfortunate. Fewer businesses means fewer businesses to collect tax revenue from. So that is not good. Of course, everything I've just described is really only a tiny part of the tax fiddling and the tax meddling that Rachel Reeves has been doing. Because you see, she's actually increased a whole host of taxes. Inheritance taxes for the farmers, capital gains tax has increased, and so on. She's managed to increase taxes in this country by £40 billion in a single budget.
In the manifesto, you criticised the Conservatives for taking the tax burden to a 70-year high. What is it now at the end of this Parliament after your budget? What will it be?
I'm being really straight with people. The tax burden overall goes up. But
What's
we've
it go
made
up
decisions.
to, from where?
It's the highest burden
Ever.
of tax.
That is the biggest increase in a single budget for 32 years. Process how significant that is, particularly from the party who are saying they weren't going to increase taxes. It is laughable, but also cryable, but I'll try not to cry. Now, will this actually generate the additional £40 billion that Rachel Reeves wants it to? Well, according to the CBI, who are economists, real economists, not Rachel Reeves economists, no, it won't. In fact, it may end up costing money overall for all of these changes that she's made. Listen to this from the report. Collectively, these measures are expected to drive down economic activity, eroding the tax base far more than initially projected. Instead of improving the public finances, the analysis implies the changes could cost the government £1.26 billion more than maintaining the status quo. So while she's tried to grab all this additional revenue, actually it's not going to happen. She's going to lose money because of the changes she has made. If that sounds a little bit crazy to you, the idea that Rachel Reeves could increase the levels of taxation but actually generate less tax revenue for the economy and for the treasury, well, hear me out. There's an idea in economics called the Laffer curve, and it's actually really quite simple to understand. If you are in a low tax economy and as the government you want to generate some additional funds, you can increase the tax rate and you will generate those funds. But if you keep increasing the level of taxation, eventually you hit a threshold, at which point, if you keep increasing taxation levels, you will generate less tax revenue. Now, let me illustrate that with an example. Imagine that you live in a country where the tax rate is 30% for income tax. And all of a sudden overnight, the government decides, actually, we're going to charge a 70% income tax. What happens? Well, maybe for the first couple of months, they do generate some additional revenue, but that's only because people are now immediately trying to work out how they can leave the country. Businesses are collapsing because nobody has any spare money left to spend in their businesses. The whole of the economic system would very quickly collapse. People would flee, particularly skilled workers, the kinds of people you want in your economy. And you end up taking less, well, to be honest, realistically, in that kind of scenario, you end up with your entire country collapsing. We're not there yet at this point. But the idea is, you know, there is a certain level of taxation where if you keep trying to increase taxes, you're going to get less money. And I'm pretty sure that's what the CBI are getting at when they're talking about these increased costs to businesses. It's simply going to, you know, reduce the amount of businesses you have in the country and therefore overall reduce the tax revenue. Now let me talk through some of the items on the UK's balance sheet. And once I've done that, I'll be able to tell you just why I think the next recession will be absolutely devastating. So here we go. Last year, the UK took £790 billion in tax receipts. Okay, it's a lot of money. We spend £102 billion per year just on government debt alone. We spend £181 billion on the NHS, £116 billion on the school system, £53 billion on the military, and £300 billion on welfare, although that does actually include pensions as well. I think it's about half and half, 150-ish billion for pensions. That already adds up to £750 billion. And those are really just the big ticket items. I haven't included the cost of the civil service or foreign aid or net zero or the police force. There's a whole bunch of things that I haven't included. HS2, Sizewell C, major developments. So you can see just with those big ticket items and not even all of the other things I've just described, you're at 750 billion. But we take 790 billion. Yeah, that is why every single year we have to borrow money just to keep the country running. And in fact, the Tories have been absolutely horrendous for this. Exclude the 400 billion that they borrowed for COVID, they've actually doubled the national debt in the 14 years that they were in office. Actually, it's more than that if you include the COVID debt. Armed with that information, we can now talk about why the next recession, which I do believe is on the cards in the very near future, is going to be so difficult for us to get out of. Think about what a recession is. You have a whole bunch of people who are newly unemployed. So that welfare budget of 300 billion, well, that's going to increase. And where do you cover the costs from? If I'm correct in thinking that we are at the threshold of the Laffer curve and any additional increases in taxation would generate less revenue, well, then you can't increase taxes to try and fight your way out of a recession, which incidentally is a really, really terrible logic. But that's a topic for a whole other day. And then what about borrowing money? Well, yeah, of course, you could borrow some money. That's pretty much how we got out of the last recession, quantitative easing, and all of the countries across the globe did it. But in 2008, we had 1 trillion in national debt. We now have 2.5 trillion. You can only keep borrowing money for so long. All you are doing there is kicking the can down the road. And what industries are we going to have that might pull us out of the recession eventually? Well, let's be honest, most of the income in this country is generated from financial services. It's millionaires and billionaires sloshing money around in the capital, trying to skim a few percentage points here and there. Not a very noble way for a country to earn its bread and butter, but there we go, that is the reality. And in this country, we have more millionaires leaving than any other country except China. I don't think financial services is going to be a particularly hot industry in this country going forwards. So what about other industries? Well, I'll put a chart up and you can take a look at it, but looking at manufacturing and the chemicals industry, they're in massive decline just over the last 5 years alone. They are not going to pull us out of this. Why are those industries in massive decline, by the way? Well, I'll tell you. It's because of net zero. Of course, net zero costs the taxpayer an enormous amount in subsidies anyway, but net zero has additional costs because we here in the UK have the highest industrial energy prices of any developed country. So who would want to manufacture anything in the UK when we have heightened now costs for employer national insurance contributions? We have a heightened minimum wage. Not that those employers tend to be on the minimum wage, but that's another point. And we have the highest energy costs. People aren't going to want to manufacture things in the UK. And you can see that in the data. People are leaving, our industries are collapsing because our energy costs are so high. So how exactly do we fight our way out of the problem we find ourselves in? Well, for me, it's really rather obvious. There's just a series of steps that we need to take, policies that we need to introduce that will prioritise the native people of these islands. So anyone who arrives here on a dinghy illegally over the channel, detain and deport. Wherever they said they came from, deport them there. I guarantee you very quickly this won't be a problem because nobody will be coming here anymore. That saves you £6 billion a year. People who weren't born here should have no access to welfare payments or social housing. Another idea that I saw Rupert Lowe from the Reform Party, an excellent MP, come up with today is that if you migrated here, first or second generation migrant, and you do not have enough money by yourself to sustain your life in the UK, you should be deported, you should go home. You're not contributing to the UK, you are a net drag. Of course, there are many native English, Irish and Welsh people and Scottish people who don't contribute to the economy, but they were born here, they are native to these islands, and there is nothing we can do about that. But if you migrated here and now you're a drain on the system, you should go. I'd scrap all net zero policies, and that would save tens, if not hundreds of billions of pounds. And once you've got that, you can immediately reinvest that money into nuclear, particularly after Sizewell C, hopefully if it comes together and it works, we can reproduce that all across the country. You end up with clean energy anyway from doing that, and it's probably cheaper. The money that is saved from that, cut business rates. Let's actually have a growth economy and make the UK an attractive place to invest in again. I could go on and on. There's so many policies that you can introduce that would turn this country around before we cross the Rubicon and it really is too late. But I don't see any government having the will, including the Reform Party, I don't see any government having the will to actually get any of these policies done. It'll be seen as too controversial to the far left-wing pundits. They'll talk about it endlessly on BBC and call everyone tyrants just for trying to keep their country alive. It's pretty crazy stuff. Anyway, that's it, a bit of a rant. I did put some thought into this video, quite a complex topic, so it doesn't flow as nicely as I might have liked, but if you enjoyed the video, if you learned something, thank you very much. Give a like, comment, subscribe if you haven't, and I will see you on the next one.